The confusion was when this first was confirmed Friday, there wasn't clarity on whether it applied to new applicants to H-1B or existing as well. Then over the weekend, the White House clarified that it was just new applicants. But Hiba, could we just start by you reflecting on your weekend, the discussions you've had with clients in the technology sector, and how you've managed this process?
Certainly. So you're absolutely right. Initially, there was not clarification as to whether or not the $100,000 fee would apply to existing H-1B visa holders or new applicants. There was also confusion about whether or not this was a one-time fee versus a continuous annual fee. And what essentially happened for the first 24 hours following the proclamation was pretty close to chaos. We had several clients who are very well-known tech companies who either contacted H-1B employees who happened to be outside of the United States at the time the proclamation came out, asking them to try their best to come back before the $100,000 fee took effect. And then also we had a lot of companies, not just the companies that we work with, but very well-known companies, in the market, tell their employees to wait before engaging in any international travel until we know more. There was also instances of international flights that were getting ready to take off where several passengers requested to deplane, specifically because they wanted to avoid their companies being charged a $100,000 fee if they attempted to re-enter after an international trip. So like I said, the first 24 hours were extremely confusing, and we did the best that we could to provide the guidance that the companies need in order to communicate to their employees with what very little we knew.
Hiba, $100,000 is the fee. From this point on, what is the strategy for America's biggest technology companies and also smaller startups? Do you think that it's a manageable fee? And what is the kind of process from here? Do they just slow down hiring in the H-1B category?
A $100,000 fee for an H-1B visa petition is not manageable at all for startups, for small businesses, even for mid-sized businesses. I think that this is going to make it extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, for startups, small businesses, or mid-sized businesses to hire the talent that they need in order to be able to compete on a global scale. For larger tech companies that have more resources, I think that the ability to manage a fee of this amount is not going to be as difficult as it is for startups. But I want everyone to remember that a lot of these extremely successful international companies were once themselves startups. And so any policy that makes it harder for American startups or small businesses to innovate is going to impact our competitiveness down the line.
What's been extraordinary for many has been just seeing where the outsized impact has had, who it's had upon, and in particular, it's people coming from India, it's people coming from China, Hiba. The argument coming from the administration is that the H-1B visa process wasn't being used as it should be. Have you got any evidence of that?
I have no evidence of that. I think that there are quite a few checks and balances built into the H-1B process as it stands today. And that's actually inclusive of several levels of scrutiny as well as extensive background checks. And there is prima facie evidence, basically, in other words, preliminary evidence that has to be submitted along with the initial application for an H-1B visa in order for that application to be successful in the first place. And so I haven't seen any evidence of misuse. I think that it's a really critical tool for our companies, both tech and in various other industries, in order for them to stay competitive. I also think it's important to point out that people normally associate the H-1B visa with tech companies, which is very true. But there's a variety of different industries that rely on the H-1B visa, including research institutions, universities, and healthcare. And so this has the potential to really impact a lot of different American institutions, assuming that this goes forward and is not paused by litigation.
Now, we did see that there was an update coming from the administration that potentially doctors would have a carve-out from $100,000 in terms of a fee, Hiba. But let's go back to California, the state that's most impacted according to our data, and indeed Texas, New York, New Jersey. The companies that are based there, and then we look at the, as you say, the industries, professors, scientists, technology services, manufacturing, information. These companies, what do? Do they hire outside of the US to be able to make up for the talent shortfall while the training goes on in the US? Or is there any idea that there is enough talent here to satisfy the needs?
That's one of the concerns resulting from this fee. The concern is that a lot of companies would choose to either pause hiring, in particular international hiring, but also may choose to shift their operations abroad. And that is going to have downstream effects for the company as well as U.S. workers that work for the company. So that's one of the concerns. The other concern, as you mentioned, is that there's a variety of different companies that rely on the H-1B visa. And so there is language in the proclamation that carves out exceptions for an individual who the government deems is in the national interest of the U.S. However, what we still need to understand is the way in which these arguments requesting a national interest exception are actually going to be treated and adjudicated. As it stands now, the evidentiary standards for successfully making that argument are actually quite high. So I don't think that the language that carves out an exception is going to help any of the concerns that the industry has.
Hiba, Bloomberg's reported at length that the expectation is immediate legal challenges to this executive order. And they note in that reporting that Congress has traditionally set in a legislative or codified way fees and other associated costs. Could you just explain where you stand today, where the precedent is to challenge this, and any action that you might take on behalf of clients to challenge it?
I think that anybody who's getting ready to make a legal challenge to this is going to incorporate a few key grounds in their argument. One is that it is the responsibility of Congress to make immigration laws set immigration fees. Also, the president is basing this proclamation on a law that does grant the president broad authority in terms of restricting entry of foreign nationals into the United States if there is a national security concern or if that individual's entry to the U.S. is somehow detrimental to the U.S. However, there has to be some substantive factual evidence in support of that, which I would imagine folks who seek to challenge this proclamation will argue does not exist. And so those are the grounds that I'm going to be watching out for in terms of the upcoming legal challenges. One thing that I do want to note, however, is that the recent Supreme Court decision in Trump versus Casa made it very difficult for a single federal judge to issue a nationwide injunction, pausing some sort of presidential action from taking effect. And so one thing I know that I'm going to be watching out for is basically whether or not somebody chooses to file a class action lawsuit, how broad that class is defined, and whether or not a federal judge certifies it.